Hello there, and welcome again to the Strategy, Marketing, and Brand Workshop. Today, we're going to be talking about change, and that there's a couple of different types of change that you should be aware of, because how you respond to those different versions of change is important. So we'll get into that session right now. I'm going to share my screen. So today we're going to be talking about preparing yourself and your company for change. My name is Frank Spivak, and for more than 30 years, I've been helping organizations enhance their image, their brand, engage their customers, marketing, and enrich their businesses through various forms of strategy development. Over the years, I've been president, chief marketing officer, member of management team, currently a writer, author, speaker, trainer, coach, consultant, specifically a lifelong learner. We're going to talk about that today. And also, I'm a motorcycle rider and trainer. So as I mentioned, there are two types of change. The first is change that happens to you. For example, weather, your car won't start, the pandemic, more business related, your supplier folds, you have a key employee who quits, you now encounter a new competitor, or your competitor has come up with a brand new product that looks really fantastic, or various market shifts that take place. Now, change by you are things that you want to change. So, for example, weight or lifestyle, new direction, new goals, new plans, a new business. So it's important to understand that in the first, the change to you, which I tend to refer to as a type 1 change, this is something that's happening. It happened outside of your control, and you need to respond to it. Type 2 change is change that you want to have happen and make a change in who you are, who your business is, things that you want to do. So change, type 1 change to you, there's a response for all of these. So for example, for different kinds of weather, you want clothes for all season. If your car won't start, one of the things that you would do to prevent that is preventative maintenance. Pandemic is just your overall ability to adapt. Your supplier folded. So maybe you have and should have been doing researching alternatives for a while as far as what to have as a backup supplier or an alternate supplier, things like that. Key employees. Are the other employees trained in some of the other jobs that some of the key employees do? Basically cross-training. When you have a new competitor, you want to evaluate the marketplace, and you should understand your position in the marketplace to begin with. And when you have a new product, now you want to evaluate that product and make comparisons between what you make and what they make, and how does that affect the customer. And for market shifts, basically, what are your optional plans? What is scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3? When you evaluate and create your strategies for the year, have you thought about optional changes to those plans? So what's the common element to all of those responses? It's preparation. And then how do you prepare for that kind of stuff? And my answer is continuous learning. Continuous learning is that process where you are always looking and searching and trying to find information. It's the concept of never being static in what you know and understand. Continuous learning is having a lifelong curiosity. I think that's the best way to explain it, in that it's a lifelong curiosity. Now, Sherlock Holmes in fictional stories is an individual who never had a particular degree. And sometimes when we talk about specialists versus generalists, we talk about the generalist being a mile wide and an inch deep, and a specialist being an inch wide and a mile deep. Sherlock Holmes was, granted, fictional, but there are people who have these kinds of abilities where they didn't go after a traditional education. They went after information that would help them in their particular vocation. They wanted to do something. They wanted to know something specifically. So, for example, when I went back to college, one of the things was that I went back to a Jesuit college, Jesuit university. So my major, what I was looking for is business information, marketing, sales, accounting, finance, things like that. But the school had a requirement for taking some religious classes to supplement that. So they were forcing a little bit of generalism on each of us. But in the case of Sherlock Holmes, he would not follow a particular course direction. If it was a subject that he had no interest in and didn't feel it was important to what he was trying to do to solve crimes, he ignored it and just concentrated on the things that related to what he was doing and trying to solve crimes. So Holmes was what might be considered the epitome of a generalist, but also having in-depth knowledge of specific subjects. I want to introduce a book to you titled Range by David Epstein. The subtitle of the book is Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. So a couple of excerpts from this book. One, which is an interesting take on things. Over-specialization can lead to collective tragedy, even when every individual separately takes the most reasonable course of action. And he's referring to the 2008 financial crisis. Everyone in their individual silo thought they were doing the right thing. The problem was that they didn't see the interactions, the interconnections on what, if they did something in their silo, how it would affect someone in another silo, someone else's specialization. Another example is that expert firefighters, when faced with a new situation, like a fire in a skyscraper, can find themselves suddenly deprived of the institutional knowledge formed in years of house fires and prone to poor decisions. With a change in status quo, chess masters, too, can find that the skill that they took years to build is suddenly obsolete. Now, firefighters who might be practicing in small towns, in rural communities, are never going to understand skyscrapers. And if they are suddenly thrown into that particular environment, they're not going to have anything to reference in their past life. Their intuition and how things work doesn't necessarily help them and can actually lead them to poor decisions. An interesting thing that I learned through this book about chess masters is that to be a chess master, it is memorizing and understanding the variety of moves that take place and have taken place over history, and studying all the great games and remembering which move follows which other move. And if someone comes in who is not at that particular level and starts throwing things in that are different, chess masters can actually get thrown off their game. Now, this one was a particularly interesting passage in his book. He's talking about a business researcher, Chris Argeris. He studied high-powered consultants from top business schools for 15 years and saw that they did really well on business school problems that were well-defined and quickly assessed. But they employed what Argeris called single-loop learning, the kind that favors the first familiar solution that comes to mind. Whenever these solutions went wrong, the consultant usually got defensive. Argeris found their brittle personalities particularly surprising, given that the essence of their job is to teach others how to do things differently. This was really, really striking to me. And I get in this particular fashion. I get other people do as well, where you encounter a situation and you search back in history and say, here is something that I did, something that happened to me 10 years ago. So I know the answer to this, and I'm going to take that particular stance. The problem is that it isn't 10 years ago, and that it's an entirely different circumstance. So even though you might be in a similar company that you were in 10 years ago, and you may have a similar situation, it's going to be different. No matter what you think, it's going to be different. So there is this familiarity that going back to the same things over and over again will not solve the problems. A few other things. And this was kind of an interesting angle on things. The most successful experts belong to the wider world, meaning they're not cloistered in a specific institution. You can have a very good specialist, but an overall expert is going to be someone who has a broader understanding of the world and how things are connected and interconnected. Scientists inducted into the highest national academies, are much more likely to have strong avocations outside of their vocations, meaning they're not studying, every waking hour about one particular thing. They're actually going in completely opposite directions, as noted in this next sentence. Nobel laureates are at least 22 times more likely to partake as an amateur performer, whether it's a painter, dancer, singer, or actor. Excuse me. They are they're taking their time to break their thoughts from their specialization. Even the best universities aren't developing critical intelligence, not critical thinking, but critical intelligence. They aren't giving students the tools to analyze the modern world, except in their area of specialization. And their education is just too narrow. Several years ago, there was an article in the Harvard Business Review called Mind the Skills Gap. This was for me, I don't want to say it was necessarily eye-opening, but for me, more reaffirming. In it, basically in the first two paragraphs of the article, the premise is laid out that a bachelor's degree used to provide enough basic training to last a career. Yet today, the skills college graduates acquired during college have an expected shelf life of only 5 years. The lessons learned in school can become outdated long before student loans are paid off. And we'll explore a little bit about how that could be, but it's part of it is the fact that education curriculum, no matter what it is, education curriculums tend to be behind the times. They aren't cutting edge. Those are the researchers. The curriculum, what people are teaching and studying, tends to be from a few years old as far as information. So being a continuous learner keeps you and your employees current and ready with up-to-date solutions. When you go through your bachelor's degree and say it's in accounting, one of the things that happens if you're a CPA, you are required to have continuing education credits. The whole key to that is that rules change, things change, and you need to be up to date on all of that. So there are some professions which require you to maintain that continuous learning aspect. So why is this? And this is a lot of speculation, a lot of my opinion on what I believe how this takes place. And first is the praise of specialists creates more specialists. When we hear about something earth-shattering and groundbreaking in neuroscience, what happens? We get more neuroscientists. Change is always taking place, but we rarely acknowledge it. There's debate on the acceleration or the rate of change. Some might say, well, the rate of change back in the 1900s when we switched from buggies to cars was an incredible change. But we're having those kinds of incredible changes all the time. But we don't look back at it and understand that change is always taking place. This morning I walked outside and it was only 67 degrees. Yesterday it was 87 and stormy. That changes, and we're used to seeing that in the weather that we're experiencing, but we rarely acknowledge it in the things that take place. Another is new information is more easily spread. We have the internet now, and we've had it for a couple of decades at least. Before you had to be very purposeful in what you were looking for, and now because of that, we're getting used to the immediacy of a single answer, but we seldom study all of the components. And there's a tendency to look within our own sphere for answers instead of looking outside of it. We take less time to reflect. Critical thinking takes time, and we say to ourselves, I don't have time to go over this issue. I'm gonna sound really ancient, really old. And when we were kids, there was no internet, obviously. And if you had to look up a word, one of the things that would happen is that you would find your word, you could identify how it's spelled, what its meaning is, and things like that. But then you would have the opportunity to see other entries around that. So this certainly happened to me. And the same thing is true with an encyclopedia. You might be looking up something on Argentina, and you be flipping through the pages, and now you're looking at Antarctica. So it's the kind of thing where I want to call it purposeful wandering. You have that opportunity to see information that's there that maybe you hadn't thought about, but then all of a sudden, there it is. It's interesting. One of the things that happens when we go to Google or find a search engine, we tend to go down a rabbit hole. They'll find the initial answer, and then there'll be some sub question related to that answer. And we'll keep digging and digging further and further and further until we get so far away that we lost connection with what we were doing. But it's not that purposeful wandering where you're looking at something. You're just going down a rabbit hole of very specific information. So to me, I love the internet. I love Google. Don't like the tracking and all that kind of stuff. But the idea is that we are um, we're not having the luxury of browsing. Even though it is a browser, we're not actually browsing. We're looking, we're hunting for data. So what is continuous learning? There's the personal development side of things, books, reflection, whether you're reading a book on a biography of someone that you have a particular interest in, someone who is an interesting person in history. Those are interesting in and of themselves. I read a book on James Baker, who was essentially the penultimate politician, Republican politician, and while he was extremely partisan when it came to voting and things like that, when he was in office as Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, he got things done, and it was interesting to learn that kind of thing. Same thing with George Marshall. George Marshall was a truly interesting guy, had lots of problems, and he was he helped perpetuate the racist segregation in the military, but truly interesting guy with a very broad understanding of the world. So there's personal development, and also taking time to reflect, just giving yourself your opportunity to just sit and think about life. So then there's professional development, obviously books, courses, specific training programs, college, doesn't matter what it is, as far as I'm concerned. Liberal arts education is there for a reason, to give you a broader perspective of the world of life. Networking, being part of a group that has different personalities, different people, are all add to your personal development. Having peer groups, someone who's at your level, if you're owner of a company, if you're the marketing manager of a company, having peer groups to be able to talk about things is important for professional development. And this last one, purposeful wandering. Years ago, I and again, I'm ancient. As far as young people go, I am ancient in how I did things. So many years ago, when we wanted to, as a marketing and advertising manager, one of the things to do is to find how much your competitors were spending. You had to subscribe to a service that looked for all the ads in all the different magazines, and you would keep these clippings, so it was called a clipping service. There is some of that on Google does some types of clipping services, but the idea was that you could find out then where they were advertising, what their message was, what it was that they were trying to sell, how they were trying to reach people, and then you would keep that as a file. And the other thing is, I would do that with interesting articles, and I would just clip an article, put it in a folder, and then maybe every 3 months, every 6 months, pull out that folder and look back at it. What was interesting? What compelled me to save that particular article? And over time, I could see my own development as I was putting together specific articles of a certain nature. So that purposeful wandering has a delightful quality to it, because you can go back to it and look at that and get that light bulb feeling again. And continuous learning is just not for the owner. It is absolutely for everyone. It's great that the owner is spending money and time on personal development, but it needs to happen with everybody. And for continuous learning to truly be effective, you need to have some sort of plan. And the plan could be very open-ended, but have some sort of plan. So, for example, read one business book a month, and then read a fiction story every other month. Take an online course. I'm going to take an online course every every other month. I'm going to go to a conference and just sit in the audience and learn, but have some sort of plan. And then with your employees, have them develop a plan. Ask them what interests them in their career with your company. What is it that they feel would help them do a better job, be a better person, and reward that learning. When I got out of high school, I said, forget it for college. But over time, I went to work and decided I needed to go to college. So in that process, there was tuition reimbursement programs. It's not necessarily a reward because the employee's putting it out, but there is an acknowledgement, because when you had a good grade, you got full reimbursement of the course. If you didn't do well, then the course is on your own money. But it's a way to reward learning. So take away that barrier of learning by saying, look, we'll pay for it. In the broad scheme of things, paying for an online course of $200 or $300 or $500 that is actually going to contribute to the bottom line is far, far worth it. And you will have a better employee and an employee who's more loyal. So some of my adages, some of the things that I kind of believe in. And when you're always learning, you are always growing. You can never touch the river in the same place ever. Once you're in, it changes for the next step. So when you learn, you are always growing. And when you're growing, you are always learning. You're growing because you're expanding your horizon, your understanding of the world. That is a form of learning. And when you're learning and when you're growing, you become ready for anything. Anything that happens, you are ready for that situation. The result to you and your business is unqualified success. It's sustainable success no matter what happens. So continuous learning is something for you and your organization and your employees, because that's the only way to become successful. So to summarize, go back on some of the things that we talked about, is that there are two types of changes. This is my definition. There are two types of changes. Change that happens to you and change that you want to have happen. And in this particular session, we talked about type 1 change. Your ability to respond to type 1 change will determine your success. And how do you prepare for that? Continuous learning. And that continuous learning has to be you and your employees. I would encourage you to read Range by David Epstein, a really, really good book. You can also read my book, Principles for Sustainable Success, because my very first chapter is continuous learning. That's one step in continuous learning. And you can find that on my website. Now, our next session will be how to prepare change for yourself and your company. Switching that around. When you want to make change happen, you have to prepare that change for everyone else, because guess what? It's type 2 change for you, but it's type 1 change for them. And as an offer to you, one of the things that I'm offering to do is a free 60-minute one-to-one session to help you get unstuck. One of the things of becoming and understanding and working with change is that you can get stuck. Change might be happening so fast that you're unsure where to go. So I'm offering a session just for you to be able to let loose, try and get some feedback, and get unstuck. Try and move forward. The process is simple. You answer three questions about what you're experiencing. You schedule a time, and then during our session, I'm going to give you at least 2 ideas that you can use immediately to help you move forward, to break free and be confident in what you're going to be doing next. So to look at that information and to schedule a time, just go to frankspivak.com/unstuck. So I want to thank you for attending, and now it's time for questions. And again, thank you for attending. My business is in strategy, marketing, and branding through coaching, training, and consultant, and I would love to be your partner in success. So until next time, we'll just handle questions. Thanks.